and gentlemen. My name is Ian Cunningham. I'm the Managing Director for Thedden Farms. Thedden runs two farms in the Western Cape, predominantly in the Elgin area and in the Vliesdorp area. The farm in Grabo is fine farms. It's 160 hectares, of which 120 is arable and plantable. And then in a recent addition to the Thedden portfolio was High Noon Farms in the Cunningham Valley, which extends to over 1,800 hectares, of which 350 hectares is arable. I've been in the apple industry for the past 10 years and thoroughly enjoyed it. I think it's a really fluid and dynamic industry at the moment. There's a lot of change taking place, particularly with rootstocks and cultivars. I think something that's an increasing sort of topic for discussion is cover crops and around soil health and how we can improve the soil. I've watched documentaries and I've read up on articles that a handful of soil has more microorganisms than the entire population of the planet. They're talking, a teaspoon of soil can hold up to 50 billion life forms. So if we are only looking at the architecture of a tree above the ground, then I think we're in for a hiding coming forward. So I started with the idea, or I didn't start the idea of cover crops. I definitely stole and borrowed from colleagues of mine in both the grain industry and in the vineyard industry. And I think the palm fruit industry can learn a lot from those two sectors within agriculture. They've been punting cover crops. I don't know if it was for the same ideas as we are, but I think for us to say that we came up with the idea would be wrong. We're definitely standing on the shoulders of the works that the shoulders of the work that they did. So I presented this cover crop presentation 2 years ago for Sheila. It was also just after I was nominated for Young Farmer of the Year in the Western Cape. And we took it from there. And the nice thing is I've got an economics background. I studied finance and economics at UCT. And it just helped me putting numbers to it. So we'll start with an idea worth planting. A guy someone internationally that I followed quite closely whilst I was at varsity was Steve Jobs. He once said innovation distinguishes between a leader and a follower. There's nothing wrong with being a follower. We've had lots of guys that we've hitched our trailers to in the past, but I think for us taking the next leap in agriculture comes with taking risks, and with that we do need to become leaders, and we are going to make mistakes. I've definitely made mistakes with our cover crops already, and we learn from it, and every year we try and improve on it. So I've mentioned that at a glance, High Noon and Fine Farms is over 2,000 hectares collectively. Between the two farms, 355 hectares of arable land. Currently in production, we've got 280 hectares of apples and pears. There's 13 hectares of vines, 50 hectares of young plantings. The permanent staff component is 130. Then we employ 580 seasonal staff. The bins per annum, I'm not proud of, to be perfectly honest, but if you break it down, Fine Farms is an exceptional property. We produce 19,000 bins on effectively 100 hectares there. This farm is carrying far below what it should be. It only did 28,000 bins. In the next 4 to 5 years, my aim is on this farm to produce 44,000 bins just on this farm. Then you add 19,000 from Fine Farms, then it's a really nice business. So this was just a drone shots of Fine Farms in Elgin. As you can see, really nice, neat, well-established farm. It was regarded as a blue chip property when we bought it in 2009. Nothing's changed other than the fact that it's more royal blue now. We've really put a lot of effort into that property, and with a phenomenal team effort from my mother and my general manager there and our foreman and the rest of our office staff. Really an absolute jewel in Elgin, and I've got no doubt that in time High Noon will even surpass Fine Farms. So something that I stole and from the All Blacks mantra was tomorrow starts today, and I think it's a brilliant sort of motto or creed to stand by. The challenges that we face as horticulturalists, particularly in the palm fruit industry, is the poor growth in years 1 to 3. That's driven by a lot of factors. One was substandard rootstocks and plant material from the nurseries. That has been addressed. I think the trees that we're getting now from the nurseries are far superior to any trees that we've gotten in the past, particularly in the last 2 years. Something that is obviously hugely detrimental to, or is a reason for the poor growth in years 1 to 3, is the apple replant disease complex. There's so many facets to it, from fungi to nematode, and no one can really pinpoint what our issue there is. All we know is that if you're in your second or third generation of apple plantings, the trees just don't respond to how they used to. Other challenges we face are obviously the nematodes, water scarcity. We've been really blessed with good rains in the last 2 years, but we only need to look back in 2017, 18, 19 and remember how bad the drought was. We are very fortunate in Elgin that we've got an incredibly resilient water source in the Groenland Water Users Association, the Eikenhof Dam, and then at High Noon, obviously we own source of water, which is really a safety net for us. So something that when I put this presentation together, the question I sort of threw out there was, are we actually only farming 40% of our land? And the reason I throw that 40% out is, we'll go through it now, how we set up an orchard. We say 40% of our orchard is currently our planting density is 4 meters by 1.5 meters, 4 meter row width, 1.5 meter in row, and that gives us a plant density of 1,667 trees per hectare. So at Fine Farms, that is the way we're going. The reason that we're standardizing at 4 meters by 1.5 is we're quite a steep farm, and it's really undulating. We've got very few areas that are flat, and I want uniformity across the business. At High Noon, we're going to standardize at 3.5 meters by 1.5 in row. It's a lot flatter here, so we can definitely go closer in the row. The rootstocks that we're using, as mentioned earlier, CG 778. It's been proved. It's still in trial. I'd say it's in beta phase. It's the most vigorous rootstock that we can get out of the Cornell Geneva series, and the benefits inherent with it over the Malling rootstocks is, or the Merton rootstocks, is that it is supposed to be apple replant tolerant, nematode tolerant, woolly apple aphid tolerant. It's not resistant to these, but the tolerance gives us a head start in year 1 and 2. So we plant exclusively CG 778 on Fine Farms. That is our rootstock of choice. At High Noon, we have got some deep soils that we're going to have to look at something less vigorous, such as CG 202. But the main thing is that it's got the genetic benefits of being tolerant to these pathogens in the soils, and then obviously woolly apple aphid, where we are losing product, pesticides and pesticides to combat it. So our planting regime involves us planting 1,667 trees a hectare. We get Lumbri compost. Lumbri is the compost provider, or the business that was set up between ZZ2 and De Toys for their Natid boerdery. It's made exclusively for apples, or specially for apples. So it's got specific parameters in terms of nitrogen content, in terms of wood biomass, and all the sort of ingredients. And we put 15 cubes of hectares, or 15 cubes a hectare of that, and then up from 80 cubes of chips up to 150. It depends on how many chips we have from taking out trees the previous year. So what our goal is going forward is, by planting cover crops, we can do another 30 cubes of organic material, growing it in the orchard and throwing it onto the bunkie. The big challenge with getting chips and material is the transport cost. You're having to transport effectively a cube is a ton, so per hectare you're having to bring in between 80 and 200 tons of raw material. The transport costs of that become quite extravagant or high. And the big thing that we see is, even after you're putting down between 80 and 200 cubes of material, that organism that we have created in the soil is eating it. We have to keep feeding it. So once you've set that system up by putting cover crops in, by putting compost down and creating, live, an ecosystem, You've got to keep feeding it, otherwise it's for nothing. It's pointless us doing it for 2 years, the chips are gone, and then we step away. That's not going to help our cause. So currently what we do is, the first 4 years of an orchard life cycle, we plant cover crops. We used to do it with a rotavator with a seed planter. Since then, we've come across the no-till planters, and I think that's the way forward. But in the first year, we'll definitely do it with the rotavator just to level the working area, and thereafter no-till. So we started with no-till this year. So our production, this has changed. It said production in third leaf. The first Geneva rootstocks we planted were in October last year, in 2020. We're going to be putting them into production in year 2. And we'll term it a training crop, but the trees grew so well we'll be putting 30 to 40 tons on them, as opposed to maybe 5 to 6 tons. And that's the difference of, there's 3 factors involved. 1, the genetics of the rootstock. 2, I think our farming practices are improving. And 3, the cover crops. There's no doubt about it. I can't quantify it, but individually, but as a collective, those 3 pillars have changed us from going to be in full production in year 6, I would say, to year 4, which means we'll be breaking even in year 5. So that's how fluid the environment is. This was a presentation I did 2 years ago. In that, we've started to see the difference. So going back to why I say we're only farming 40% of our land. If you take the orchard rows running from top to bottom, those 3 trees in each row, we're neglecting the work row in between. So we have got on the 4 meter row width, we've got a 1.5 meter bunkie where the trees grow, and then we've got a 2.5 meter working row. If you take 2.5 meters out of the 4 meters, we are looking at 40% of our land that we are actually farming, or we're only farming the 1.5 meters, which is 40%, so we're neglecting 60%. So if we can grow something, any material in there, and use it and transport it over to the bunkie, then we are eliminating our transport cost. The other thing, if you go back in history, farmers used to have crops in the ground all year round. There was never a time of bare soil. So I think the Industrial Revolution with fertilizer and what have you after World War I and II, that changed our agricultural practice. I think we've got to go back, and the wheel sort of, die wiel draai weer, going back to sort of looking at old practices, keeping our soils green and keeping them covered. So for me, it's the importance of adding organic material back into the soil and improving the carbon content. Soil health is a very broad term, and I'm not going to get into the dynamics of that because I think everyone's got an opinion. For me, it's just about improving the condition of our soil. And there's a couple of ways of doing it. My personal feeling is biomass, tons. So what we do is we do a cover crop mix, and we sow it in May. And then in sort of October, we have had a mulcher built that will deposit the cuttings onto the bunkie, and they've really done a good job of bringing more of these out to market. When we first started with this 2-3 years ago, there was only one company. Now there's almost 4 or 5 bringing these machines to market. One thing that we've learned about that I'm learning about the cover crop mix, and I watched it on a Netflix documentary narrated by Woody Harrelson. I think it's called Kiss the Soil or Love the Soil. Was the importance of having diversity in your cover crop mix. It's pointless us planting one crop, i.e. just a sorghum, because then we are just promoting a monoculture again. Every year we need to plant something diverse and make it at least 4 to 5 species. Every time we do that, we're bringing in new sort of organisms and providing different types of contents for the microbes in the soil. So as I said, we're looking at doing sort of 30 tons of organic matter. It's cost effective, your cheapest, if you just plant straight kurog running at about 540 rand a hectare, sown and mowed onto the bunkie, versus if I had to bring 30 cubes of mulch in, it would cost me 5,100 rand. So I mean, it's a factor of 10. This is a trial that I did in 19 that I really, as a material, the radish, faba beans, kurog, clover and vetch. What I liked about the radish was it dug deep holes into the soil and actually rotted in there, and thus created a more porous sort of environment, and it definitely softened the soil. The faba beans, obviously being a legume with the benefits of of binding nitrogen. Kurok was just straight biomass. Clover also the sort of whole legume effect. And then vetch was just a very nice creeper. And every time we had a little bit of rain, it sort of came back. And subsequently, what I'm seeing is where I've done 2 years of cover crops on an open field, the third year that it was lying fallow that we're going to start planting now, we didn't have to sow anything. It's come up beautifully by itself. It just took a little bit of fertilizer and the stuff's already standing at sort of 2-3 feet. So it was just building up a positive seed bank. You can use, there's nothing wrong with using weeds as a cover crop, but there's just more benefits to it. So this was the machine that we had built, and as you can see, this was it was kurok, this was straight kurok, and this was dispatching it onto the bunkie. And as you can see, we've got the compost underneath there. So then we run through with this, which will be 30 to 40 cubes, which we measured, and then we'd come with between 80 and 200 cubes of wood chips. And then, as I say, every year we'd be able to get at least 1 or 2 cuttings and throwing that on, feeding that system again. Here's just the cost base. Again, this was saying an objective of 200 tons of organic matter. We've changed this to actually wanting to be 300 to 400 tons by starting off with a base of 200 tons or 180 to 200 tons of material in the first year. But just looking at wood chips versus and cover crops versus just the wood chips, you can see there's a 60% saving. Obviously, there's an assumption that the farm has a planter and a mulcher, but the big thing is the inflation that I've said in costs for year 2 to 4 on the left on the wood chips. I think that's being quite on a low estimate base. The reason I say so is fuel is getting increasingly more expensive, and then trying to source material. If we are mulching at the rate we are mulching, the industry is planting at the rate the industry is planting, trying to get raw material is becoming a challenge. Hence, the guys that set up Lumbri in series are looking at setting up satellite plants closer to where they can get raw material, because it's just too far to transport the raw material for them. So yeah, here's some of the breakdown. Again, this was in 2019. The kurok prices, the bean prices, the clover and the radish. And you know, that mixture came at 1,266 Rand a hectare. The crimson clover, I increased the sowing rate there from 2 kilos to 5 kilos. You know, you can play with the sowing rates. The one thing I will say is, if you are having a heavy rate or so for your cereal, then you just need to be careful that it doesn't put pressure on your crimson clover and the beans. But one thing I am seeing is that the radish flourishes. That's not a problem whatsoever. The other thing that I've seen and learned, this was in 2019, a field that we did. This was our start of the project, pretty much. What we are learning is, if you plant a cereal in year 1, i.e. kurok or barley, the next year make sure you don't plant the same cereal. I think the guys in the grainlands have shown that planting medics in between their sort of cycles for and lupins in between their cycles for wheat has helped them hugely. But the big thing is, if you are putting kurok on kurok, you're actually just establishing a monoculture again. It defies the logic of what we're trying to achieve. So, as I said, the economics of it, I mean, I've shown you there that it's more cost effective to grow the mulch on your own property and move it half a meter as opposed to transporting it in. Obviously, there's the temperature buffering with our increase in summer temperatures. That's becoming important. I think something that we are going to start measuring, and we have done it now, is I'm starting once I've taken a block out of production, before I sow a cover crop, I'm taking soil analysis and analyzing the carbon, the microorganisms, a fair bunch of sort of stats so that we can measure and quantify, because at the moment I can see there's a difference, and but I cannot measure it and quantify it. But I can see that the soil is more pliable, it's more friable, it's just in a better condition. It's been to gym and it's looking lean and mean. But in terms of quantifying it, I need to still do some homework on that. The concerns, what to plant, lessons, bollworm. If you let some of the crops like your cereal seed, you need to be you just need to be vigilant with bollworm. But we have got, fortunately, we've got a biological that we can use, that which is a virus which we spray, which sorts out, called Baldex. The other thing is sowing too late. I think this year I was caught out a bit by the rain, that I started sowing into late June, and I can see the conditions, it's not as great with this cold snap we've had, but it is what it is. And then there's the concern, are the cover crops that we're sowing, are they not taking too much water away from the plants? I don't think it's an issue, to be perfectly honest, because we're not irrigating the plants, we're irrigating a ridge. So we've got no irrigation in the water. And I think particularly in wet springs, it could be beneficial having a crop in your work row that is pulling moisture out to help the roots dry out. So that's something that we are seeing. And yeah, cover crops are just pretty. It's a picture of my little son Mac and my wife Inge. And yeah, this is getting back to how the improvement in the condition of the soil. So that picture, this was us mowing that in, call it October. So this is a standard John Deere tractor, but look at the height of this. Was that Kurach, beans, radish mixture and clover. I mean, it's standing comfortably at 1.5, 1.7 meters tall, and look at all that biomass. And for us to pay 1,300 Rand to establish that, it's an absolute no-brainer. Another benefit has been seeing incredible amount of bird life that's come back to the farm. So then this was the bulldozer. This is in February of 2019. Remember, this is the height of the drought. Look at how beautiful and loose and moist that soil is. That's in that same orchard. And standing in that orchard today, I will argue is the best looking 7-month-old orchard in the country. The trees are all north of 3.8 meters. They've grown on average 1.6 meters. We filled our space. That's that orchard that we're talking about doing 30 to 40 tons on in year 2. And again, all this, getting good trees and the genetics as a sort of combination has allowed us to achieve that. So this was just some of the radishes that we planted, somewhere in summer, somewhere in September. The sorghum and radish cover crop that I've got going at the moment in Fine Farms is looking good. That particular field we are planting to, it is Fuji Royale in 3 months' time, also in CG 778. It looks fantastic. And in that orchard, I haven't re-sown it, but the cover crop is looking better than it is there now. What I did, this was just a little bit of a trial. I went in through by hand, just went and scattered radish on the bunkie itself at a very high density. And what I saw was that if you go at such a high density, it kind of, the competition sorted itself out, that nothing grew too high. So it actually stayed nice and low below the spitter level, and definitely made the soil a lot more sort of friable and a lot softer with a lot of holes drilled into it, which would increase the oxygenation of the soil and the roots. Lessons learned: don't oversow radish. Again, if you go to sort of 5 kgs a hectare plus, you end up with lots of small little radishes. Checking the soil temperature. Sorghum I sowed too early. I think I sowed in September. It was too early for it. This was 2 years ago. It needed to be sort of sowed November. You need soil temperatures north of sort of 13, 14 degrees. Definitely sow earlier in autumn and later in spring. Again, it's easy to say these things, but then the weather catches you. I mean, this year we had a beautiful period in April, but I was still too busy picking, and then May came along and we had lots of rain, so you get caught by it. Orchard of the future. This is what we have in practice now. 2 years of cover crops on fallow land, only CG rootstocks. I have done no fumigation, and I can comfortably say, unfortunately, we are going to still have to fumigate. What I've seen, there is variability in my one orchard. You cannot see the difference between the non-fumigated and the fumigated. On that's on a good soil. On the two marginal sites, there is a difference. So unfortunately, it's not going to happen just yet, but I'm still going to try it. Every orchard will have a row unfumigated, and we will try and dose it with biologicals, your sort of rhizovitals and metarhiziums and mycorrhizas. And let's see if we can get away with it, because it's also pointless building up all this beautiful biomass and then nuking it. So it's something that we've still got to figure out. Then the other thing is, with these new rootstocks that are so tolerant to our soil pathogens, are we going to have to replant? I think, this is wishful thinking, I think we could get away with grafting. If your root system is there, why do we have to pull out trellises, irrigation, all those things? You could literally graft and be back in production in year 2. And I've seen it where we have pulled a cultivar such as Kanzi, which doesn't do well in Elgin. We've grafted it over to Fuji. We were in commercial production in year 3. And that was on an old Mertens rootstock. If we do it on these new Geneva rootstocks, I think we could be even for a better price.